Thank you, President Oristano James. This evening, in a few moments, Ms. Fela will be putting the final pieces together of our proposed budget for the 2021-2022 school year, and we will be asking the Board of Education to adopt this proposed budget tonight. This budget process has been unique on a number of levels. First and foremost, Ms. Fela will touch upon this shortly. We developed a metric for estimating costs next year by looking at what monies did we actually expend in budget lines in years past on a 3-year average. We knew that this year and last year were unlike any other, but we also wanted to make prudent judgments about where do we actually spend money and how much do we spend there, rather than how much did we budget last year and just building off that first initial budgeted amount, because sometimes that budgeted amount wasn't expended. Secondly, it included stakeholders at various levels in our schools. Teacher leaders informed administrators, and administrators are now, have informed the board and the community. And all of those presentations that we've done over the past 2 months can be found on our website. They've been posted, and they can also be found on our YouTube channel. So if anyone from the public wants to know, how these monies are being expended, they can go back to those meetings. Third, this year's revenues include a record amount of state aid. Our state aid has increased by an estimated 8.4% from last year to this year. Ms. Fela will be getting into more of the particulars shortly. And also, some of you may have heard that there are massive amounts of federal monies in the American Recovery Plan. Those monies, while we'll appreciate them and we'll use them to benefit our students and community, are not included in this budget because those are a one-time infusion of federal dollars. We don't know exactly how much yet, but we've heard around a $10 million amount that we need to expend between now and September 30th of 2022. Ms. Fela, is that correct?
I believe it's 2023.
Okay. But there's a finite, thank you for correcting me, there's a finite period for that expenditure. And once that period is over, that $10 million from the federal government is gone. So it would not be prudent of us to roll that into this budget proposal. So with all that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Fela, who has worked tirelessly to make all of these numbers work and fit. And we think that this is a very reasonable budget that we're putting before the board tonight for voter approval in May. So Ms. Fela.
Thank you. Ms. Montez, can you share the presentation on the screen, please? There we go. Okay. Can everyone see the proposed budget? So before we get into the details of the proposed budget, I wanted to talk a little bit about the staffing changes to this current year's budget. These are positions that the board created during the 2021 school year. We created a school district accountant position, we created a teacher aide position, and we created 3 teaching assistant positions. And during our budget meetings with building administrators, we asked them for personnel requests or reductions. There were very few for the 21-22 school year. There was 1 request for an additional security attendant, a request for a social worker in the middle school, and a reduction of a guidance counselor in a middle school. All the people that are retiring June 30th, 21 will be replaced for the 21-22 school year, and all the positions that are either filled or open are included in the 21-22 budget. So what does that look like dollar-wise for personnel? The guidance counselor reduction and the social worker increase are kind of a wash, and the security attendant salary is roughly around $30,000. So the net increase in staffing is less than $30,000 in the 21-22 budget. So now to the overall budget proposal. So for the 21-22 school year budget, we have a process that we go to, and it begins with the budget calendar. The board adopts the budget calendar in November of each year, and that details out when our different budget meetings are, when the budget presentations to the board is, and when the board has to adopt the budget, and when the annual meeting and the budget vote. When we began the process this year, like Dr. Evans said, we created a 3-year average budget and expenditure comparison for every building and department so that they could make informed decisions on where they wanted to budget their money for the upcoming school year. Around January, middle of January, towards the end of January, we usually get the governor's state aid proposal. When we received that, there was a big discussion about 20% aid reductions, and that we should not, count on a lot of state aid increase, but with the American Recovery Act, that kind of bailed out New York State, and we are going to see an increase in our state aid, and I'll get to that in a little bit. March 1st, the tax levy limit calculation is due. That's based on the 2020-2021 levy, and I went through that whole formula. There's a lot of bits and pieces to that to come up with what the maximum amount of money we could levy in the following school year. We had the budget requests and presentations to the board. Can you go back one? Thank you. Those happened between February and April. And usually on April 1st, these approved state budget with aid projections comes out. That was delayed this year. And but we did get it, not in time for last meeting, but we did get it in time for this meeting. And then with that budget, there was this, it talked about this federal stimulus money and the allocations to each school district. So we have to plan and discuss the use of that federal stimulus money. So our goal always is to keep the tax levy as low as possible. And so initial budget rollover, back in the beginning, we projected what our rollover budget is, keeping everything the same, moving people up on step. I projected a $92,686,000 rollover budget. Our proposal for 21-22 is less than that by about $1.4 million, or $91,266,606. It is a small increase from the 2020-2021 budget of $733,000, or 0.81%. So less than a 1% increase budget to budget. So what makes up the expenditure budget proposal? As you can see, mostly, and it's the same every year, salaries and benefits are the largest portion of our budget proposal, followed closely by BOCES services. The equipment number includes purchases of buses for the following school year, and then there's our debt service expenditure. So that's where our $91 million comes from. And so this chart just kind of shows the different categories as a percentage, and you can see salaries and benefits and BOCES make up about 85% of the budget proposal. And of course, you have your expenditure side, so you have to match that with your revenue side of the budget. So for the revenue budget proposal. So kind of hard to see, and I don't know why it's in black when it should be in red, but anyway, our budget proposal for 2021-22 represents a decrease in the property tax levy of about 2.6%, or $916,000. The reduction in other tax items are pilots. We project that number to go down a little bit. And then you see our state aid number. Our state aid number is increasing by over $3 million, or 8.39%. Other areas of the budget that have a significant change include our interest on investments. Our interest income has plummeted in the last couple of years. And so that's reflected there. Refund of BOCES, we're showing an increase. We've averaged about 2.2 million for the last 3 years. As you know, BOCES cannot have a surplus at the end of their fiscal year. So any extra money that they have to give back to each school district. So that's that number. Miscellaneous are tuitions, admissions, things of that nature. Transfer from debt service was a number that we used for last year to balance the budget. We had to spend that on our last debt service payment. That's required by law. So that's why there's a 100% decrease, because that's no longer there. And this budget only requires to appropriate fund balance of $2 million or $700,000 reduction. Next slide. So as you can see on this slide, it's the property taxes are about 49%, the state aid is 44%, and the rest of the items are small bits and pieces, but that's where the majority of our revenue comes from. So I'm asked a lot about the difference between the tax levy and the tax rate. So I wanted to just summarize it here. The tax levy is the total amount that the district raises in taxes from all properties. That's the amount that's limited by the tax cap calculation, or that famous 2% calculation that everyone talks about. The tax rate is determined after apportioning that levy to each town within the district's border based on equalized assessed values. So each assessor assesses the properties in the town, and then the New York State Department of Taxation and Equalization determines how close to 100% or full value each property is assessed at within a town, and they assign an equalization rate. So what does that mean? So I wanted to kind of show you how an equalization rate change can affect the tax rate. So I have an example school district with 2 townships. Both towns have assessed values of $1 million. ABC town has an equalization rate of 85%, and XYZ town has an equalization rate of 100%. This school district wants to levy $100,000 in taxes. And then once the equalization rate gets applied to the assessed values, you can see that ABC town's full value is not $1 million. It's $1,176,000. And while XYZ town with 100% equalization rate, their full value is $1 million. So the levy gets apportioned between the 2 towns based on those full values. And you can see that ABC town's tax rate is $5.40 with an apportioned levy of $54,000. And XYZ town is a tax rate of $4.59 with an apportioned levy of $45,000. Example 2 shows the same 2 towns with a 5% reduction in the equalization rate. And this one kind of shows you how the apportioned tax levy can shift from one town to another just based on a small change in the equalization rate. So ABC town still has $1 million in assessed value, but when you apply the 80% equalization rate, their full value goes up to $1.2 million. They get a larger apportionment in the levy, and their tax rate goes up. In XYZ town, even though their equalization went down and their full value increased, it didn't increase to the same rate as ABC town. So that actually showed a decrease in their tax rate and a decrease in the apportionment of the levy. So you can imagine in Monticello with 5 towns with assessed values changing every year, equalization rates changing every year, the apportionment of the levy gets shifted between one town and another. And that's why tax rates are different in each town. And I hope that helped to explain that a little bit. I know it's complicated. I'll talk about it again when we talk about the levy in August, but next slide. So here's just some historical information on the budget and the tax levy. So our proposed tax budget for 2021, it shows a 0.81% increase. Last year, we had a slight decrease of 0.76. So our budget for 2021 is about the same as it was in 1920. The tax levy is a decrease of 2.06%. And the tax levy is still lower than it was in 1819. And at the last column shows your tax levy as a percentage of the revenue, which I think is important to show that back in 1516, the towns and the school district and the taxpayers were supporting the budget to the tune of 51.5%. And over the years, with what we do in increasing state aid and different things that I report on to the state, we've been able to decrease the local contribution to 47.75%. So we're being very mindful of how much we're asking the taxpayers to contribute towards the budget. And then the final slide is about fund balance. And this is our my fund balance projection for the next 5 years. You get out past year 4 and 5, then those numbers get a little shaky, but assuming that the state holds to their promise of fully funding foundation aid over the next 3 years, at the end of the 2020-2021 school year, I'm projecting our unappropriated fund balance to go down a little bit, but we will still have a 10.3% unappropriated fund balance at the end of the year. By appropriating the $2 million for the 21-22 school year, at the end of that year, I'm projecting a 7.69% fund balance, and then it gets closer to the 4% where the board wants to be. So I'm hoping that these numbers hold close to being true, and then by the end of the 23-24 school year, we will be right at the 4% and be able to maintain that for the next couple of years. And finally, the federal stimulus money. I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So recently, State Education Department clarified that the 21-22 stimulus money, it has to be accounted for in what we call the special aid funds. So it's not part of the general fund. And I just wanted to make that clear that it is not in this $91 million budget proposal, and we will be accounting for it separately. We will have to complete an application to inform New York State of how we will be using the funds, and we have to wait for that application to be approved before we can use those funds. Some specific things: the district must reserve at least 20% of the allocation to address learning loss. And then there's different interventions. So summer school, extended day, after school programs, we can use it for different interventions to respond to students' academic and social emotional needs, and address the disproportionate impact the coronavirus had on economically disadvantaged students and students with disabilities. So that's some of the specifics that we have to use federal stimulus money for. The next slide is other. Go ahead. In addition, we can use the federal stimulus money to purchase supplies to sanitize and clean the facilities, professional development for the staff on sanitation, and minimizing the spread of infectious disease, implementing activities during long-term closures. I don't want to read it word for word. Mental health services and supports, school facilities repairs and improvements to enable operation of school to reduce the risk of the virus transmission. And the final one is testing, maintenance, inspection, repair, replacement, upgrade to improve indoor air quality in school facilities, including mechanical and non-mechanical heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. So there's a broad spectrum of what those funds can be used, and over the next month and a half, 2 months, we'll be talking deeply with the board about how we should move forward. We don't yet have an exact number from the state on what our federal stimulus will be, but hopefully that'll be coming soon. Any questions? That was a long presentation for me.
Any questions from anybody? So wait, I just flipped back into a screen, so, okay. Now I can see you all again. Any questions? Thank you very much, Ms. Fella. You obviously covered an awful lot in that long presentation with
It
no
was
questions.
long. My voice was starting to go again. I'm sorry. I
Board
don't-
always has questions around the budget, so you did a good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just if I may add, we will be having our budget hearing on May 6th. Correct, Ms. Fela? So if the public has any questions about the budget, they can certainly contact any of us via email, or they can raise them at the public hearing on May 6th.